All right. So welcome to the Creative Coherence podcast. This is, I guess, the first one that we're making public, or presenting to the world.
We'll see.
Would you introduce yourself? My name.
Oh yeah, we were just talking about sign language stuff.
Yeah. Anyway.
So my name is Chad. This is Bruce, Adam, Melody, and I guess our topic for today. Are we all good with this topic?
Yeah.
Okay. So the topic for today is we want to discuss operating under the assumption that things are pretty messed up in the world. That seems to be the general consensus. That,
there's a problem.
There's at least one problem in the world, and it seems to be the consensus that it's pretty bad. So what we want to try to find is like what is the most pertinent or pressing issue, and can it be about it?
So do we first decide, can anything be done, or we have to decide the most pressing issue first? Or can you do that even?
I think we can.
I guess that's the challenge. First I wanted to kind of open up with this word thing. There's like an interesting etymology and history to the word thing.
The council.
Yes. So yeah, it comes out of in like the root languages of I think the Proto-Indo-European language. So like the parent language to German and English and some of the other languages. It means meeting or council, where the group would convene, and in Norse culture it was once a year they would get together and they would decide on what the things were, and so it would have to be decided as a group, and then that was the thing, and that's what happened.
Wow.
The history of that.
Conscientia. Knowing together.
Yes.
It's interesting that it refers to, it's a city old thing.
Yeah, now we use it as, they're,
Stuff.
Really got generalized.
Things, yes, it's very, very generalized. But I guess we can all agree that this is a microphone, right? This thing. I don't know why I thought that was relevant to kick off the conversation.
Well, are we in a thing?
Yeah.
So what is the thing? What is the most pressing issue?
I will say that I believe that the hub from which all the pressing problems that most people I know name, and that I myself name, the hub of them all is capitalism. Is the global capitalist system. Mm-hmm. That's how I see it.
Sometimes known as the patriarchy.
Well, that goes even older than capitalism, but that's certainly,
to it. I think.
Yeah, it's certainly involved.
Who did that?
Well, the patriarchy leading to colonialism, leading to capitalism. So if capitalism is the problem, then what can the average person... Well, let's go into this. I don't know.
Okay, well, I would probably problematize even the idea of there being a problem, because problems, in my mind...
I wondered about that too. I had that little objection in the back of my head.
Are you going to quote John Lennon right now?
Which...
there are no problems, only solutions.
Definitely not. I'm coming from the other angle, where problems are what life's about. So to say this is the problem and this is the solution, in fact, actually prioritizes solutions over problems, and can lead to a melodramatic kind of negation of the problem. And so
it's just a reversing of the hierarchy.
So last time we talked about negation being, and the way that that's constructed being an important problem. And I might even say that is, if there is a essential problem, it is the way everybody frames the problem, frames the negative. And so one of the problems, I think, with capitalism is that it has us all competing with each other. It has us all blaming each other, blaming things, whatever those things may be, as opposed to maybe sitting around and deciding what the things are, what the problems that we want to work on are. We look for the problem, which we mean by the thing or the person that's getting in the way of what I really want or the proper way things should be. And so that leads, I say I said melodramatic earlier because it's a way, it's a narrative framing. It's a way of looking at problems as something is inessential or bad or evil even, and something that we want, or usually us, we're the good people, they're the bad people, or in a way of framing a problem like in health, or health is something I really want to get into later because I think it's one of the essential problems. We look for the cause being the thing that we got to get rid of in order to bring the solution, whether it be a final solution or whether it be framed in a more gradual, contingent way, like science often does nowadays, where it's contingent solutions. But I want to prioritize problems as being something that's part of the world that's not going away, and that solutions are all well and good, but they are also problems in themselves.
It's kind of like Gödel. You know, you have one system that can do a lot of things, but there's something it can't do, which leads to an expanded system, which can do a lot more, but it still has a problem, which at least one, which leads, so you get, you're not going to get utopia, you're not going to get heaven on earth, you're not going to get problem-freeness, but you can progress, and you can improve.
I think this is maybe where we differ, is that, I think you rightly focus on this development of problem solution as a kind of ongoing development of a dialectic. I only differ in the sense that I really want to problematize the way that we look for solutions, and not just naturalize this process as an inevitable, because I think that's what we tend to do reflexively, all of us. We look at a problem and assume that the way that the problem appears to us is the problem, and so we come up with a solution, and then that solution has a new problem, and this, to me, this is nature. This is why dialectics so beautifully captures natural process, because I think this is the way things naturally go. But I think the point is, when intelligence comes in, it changes the dialectic into something a little more circumspect, where it's not necessarily just going along this line of reacting to problems with solutions that then become new problems, and on the circle of life. And yes, there's development in that circle. It is a spiral in a sense. But I really want to, for me, the main political issue is not what to do, but to get people to slow down and think and be like, what are the actual frames? What are the actual ideas involved? Instead of just assuming, okay, capitalism, I'll agree. Capitalism is a way of talking about one of the main problems, because it's basically a generic word for our society. But what is capitalism?
That's
what are the
important.
What are the options?
Yeah, we need to know what we're dealing with before we can deal with it. But capitalism gets us on this accelerating path.
Right.
On this sort of it seems like, and maybe technology is wrapped up with that, where we're constantly moving faster and faster and having to do more and more things, and people are pressed, especially as right now with neoliberal capitalism and this accumulation of wealth, this vacuuming up wealth from the very bottom. People are being pressed harder and harder to do more, and so you
Time
don't
is
have
money.
time to think.
Time is money, time is...
So
is
how are we
surplus
supposed to
value,
slow
time
down
is
and think if the system is constantly accelerating the pace of life for the common people?
The linear.
And I agree. That's something that I've been thinking about for a while, and I think it was something I read by Slovo Zizek, who said that no, not just kidding. I'm not.
Are you embarrassed?
No, he's just
He's a goofball.
because he's a goofball, and yeah, it's all bombast. His public persona is very bombastic.
But he gets a big audience that way, so I don't know, maybe...
There's something to his approach.
There's a theater involved.
Yeah,
Right, man.
But his writing
One man act.
And
Philosopher Graham Harman says he's the funniest philosopher since Giordano Bruno.
Gee, look at how Jim Elmendorf from Bruce ended up.
this reminds me of a joke. I know you've all heard of it.
Well, I wanted to say one thing, one quick thing too, is that, just bringing in some Asian perspective, which is like a lot of Buddhist or mindfulness teachers say that part of the issue, or they don't say it that way, but it's just that life isn't a problem. And that's a very different perspective, and I think so that you should confront how much everything in your head is problematized. And so if life isn't a problem, what?
I definitely want to address that.
Okay, I want to hear.
I want to hear what he was.
Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, I was just, something I read by Zizek where he was saying, he was commenting on Marx's critique of
Feuerbach.
I think it's the most famous one where it's the job of philosophers is to
Interpret the world in various ways. The point is to change it.
exactly.
The last
And
thesis on Feuerbach.
Yes, and Zizek said that like maybe we need to stop acting and start and slow down and think. Slow down, read more, think more.
Well, to what you said earlier about scapegoating and blaming, it's kind of stupid when you take time to think about it, to blame capitalism as if it's an other. Capitalism is the current form.
It's us.
It's the current form of this unconscious collective self-oppression of humanity. It's us. All of humanity now is capitalist humanity. Capitalism is our praxis. It's what we do every day. We may not be fully conscious of it or clearly conscious of it, but it's our doing. And so you can't blame just the capitalist ruling class for capitalism. All of humanity is involved in reproducing ourselves in this very problematic, increasingly problematic form.
Not only that, but the way capitalism works today. So Foucault, for instance, made this distinction between disciplinary societies, and he started talking about what he called control societies. Deleuze took this word control that William Burroughs actually came up with the concept for it of it being a different type of, where discipline is top-down hierarchical control itself. I like this, the idea of actual control is, in a way, this dynamic, distributed system. And so with lay capitalism, control society, informational capitalism, not only are we the ones making it, as we are in all societies, even in disciplinary societies, even though somebody's telling you to work in a factory, you're still doing that.
You're giving him the power, collectively
power.
giving him the power to tell you what to do, right?
And nowadays, the system depends on our action for the actual protocols of control. And so the protocols, there's this book written by a couple media theorists, Eugene Thacker and Alexander Galloway, and they talk about theory of networks, and they just talk in detail how, well, in this system, nobody's in charge. Like the disciplinary society, you have a visible or not so visible sometimes, but some type of centralized elite structure. Well, when you get this distributed control society, we are the ones that are actually creating the protocols of control through our interactions. And so our actions, even the revolutionary actions, are part of the way that the protocols are created. And so that has to be really taken into account, because we're the ones not only unconsciously doing what the elites want, but we're actually part of this very distributed. I mean, yes, there's still elites, there's still people that have power, and
there's media propaganda, media control, which helps to create ideologies that people unconsciously or semi-consciously impose. That's very important to the power of
the media apparatus,
reproduction of the society.
But now it depends on our participation in the protocols, not just in us working mindlessly, and then producing something like that's. You can get rid of
our own oppression.
Now we're much more active agents, because go ahead and voice your dissent. Like that just capitalism, especially at this stage, feeds off of revolution, and so it is
to a degree.
It's a little bit like Naomi Klein's, what does she call it?
Disaster capitalism. Right. Yeah. So once the markets run out, you have to have this eternal revolution of some sort, this creative destruction of some sort. And
there's money to be made, no matter.
There's this feature of late capitalism. Well, it goes deeper than late capitalism, but capitalism does give the working class time to think, because it periodically has horrendous episodes of high unemployment. Now they're thinking under duress and under distress, but that is a feature of capitalism that the present ruling class has been unable to completely eliminate. That they may even be designing depressions that they can't prevent, designing them to meet some of their objectives, but they can't completely apparently prevent them from having.
Well, they can keep them hungry enough. Anyway.
Can I ask so when you say late capitalism,
what it means to me is if you read Marx's introduction or his preface to a contribution to the critique of political economy, where he lays out his theory of social evolution in one of the most general formulations that we have, he talks about how it's the growth of the productive forces, basically the self-productivity of humanity ultimately, but expressed through the productions of means of life and means of production. It's the growth of productivity, or the growth of the productive forces, that eventually bring the social relations of production into trouble. And I've got to say one aside here. What Marx means by social relations of social reproduction are what we tend to think of as things. He means commodities, he means money, and he means capital. And all of those things are mediated through things, but those things have projected upon them social value, and they see that they are tokens and objects that are used to maintain and reproduce a certain organization of society, capital in particular. So he's saying that the growth of productivity will at first be furthered by the capital relation, but later the capital relation will be attacked by the further growth of the productive forces. Now, the way I see that is that as capital develops and accumulates, more and more of capital value, and certainly more and more of the physical mass of capital equipment and plant equipment, takes the form of machinery, of mechanized, and even, as Marx called it, automatic systems of machinery. And the problem for the capitalist ruling class there is capitalism creates tremendous incentives to keep increasing productivity and to develop new vintages and new kinds of capital equipment. for better forms of products, new forms of products, so that the concentrated owners of huge fixed capital plant and equipment, which they've paid for by 50-year loans that have to be paid back before anything else. If somebody comes up with an invention of a new machine that's much cheaper to produce, or much more productive, even if it's not cheaper, or both cheaper and more productive, that can basically make their capital value, their accumulated capital, most of it obsolete, drop its value to zero, force it to be scrapped through competition, then they are going to be overthrown by capitalism itself. The growth of the productive forces past the point where most of capital is fixed capital plant and equipment, not labor and raw materials and so on. At that point, further development of productivity, of the productive forces of technology, threatens to overthrow economically the capitalist ruling class. And so it's when the capitalist ruling class perceives that shortly after it actually happens. In the United States, it was after the Civil War in the late 1800s, when there was this period called the Great Deflation, where machine industry had gotten so productive that all kinds of products, not just later what we experienced with electronics, consumer electronics, computers, but every kind of product practically was dropping. There was a deflation that was not caused by depression, but by the growth of productivity. And capital equipment had to be scrapped before it could be finished in many cases, because it was already obsolete by the time it was getting ready to be installed. And the capitalist ruling class realized that capitalism, in its incentivization of technological progress, of growth of productive forces, even in the capitalist limited form of that, was going to kill them. And so they, in a sense, decided they had to kill capitalism. That's what I mean by the turning point between the ascendant phase and the descendant phase of capitalism. One of the things they did was to promulgate an ideology of eugenics. The Rockefeller family in particular was involved in that, which they spread to Germany and spread wide. There were lots of eugenics laws in the U.S., which began to justify a kind of people are pollution, anti-humanist, pro-humanicide ideology, which has now morphed into people are pollution, pseudo-ecology. The idea that we have to kill off 95% of humanity, as so many of the Rockefeller spokesmen have said, in order to save the planet. What they really mean is to save their power, because they see a world in which middle classes, middle working classes are rising all over the planet, in China, even in Russia, in South Africa, in Brazil, in India, and they can't rule in a world where the growing stratum of the working class is well educated, has somewhat higher wages, is technologically developed, and is capable of innovation, capable of becoming new entrepreneurs with new technologies that are obsolete.
Why can't they?
Well, I mean, let me give you the big example. There have been people before like Philo Farnsworth and like Luzard who developed working fusion reactors, and they've been able to kill them and stop them. But
why does that matter?
Well, here it matters for this reason. If a person in their garage develops a working fusion reactor that can be scaled and replicated, then the entire petroleum industry will drastically lose value almost overnight. The stock prices will collapse, and the petroleum industry is a major basis of power for the ruling faction, the Rockefeller faction. And of course, for the Saudi ruling family,
will finance capitalism as well.
And of course, the Rockefellers have gotten into finance capital. Chase, J.P. Morgan Chase, Citibank, Bank of America. All of those are controlled by the Rockefellers, but they let out loans to the oil industry and to other industries, which in an emergent plasma technology, which comes with fusion, where, for example, you can have 100% recycling to the chemical elements of any trash, any refuse, where you can develop metallurgy using plasma instead of burning coal and burning oil and things like that. There's just such a new layer of technology that emerges from fusion power that the existing ruling class would have their economic base devalued nearly to zero, and would have their loans become unrepayable.
Well, it seems like the whole edifice of their power is built on fossil fuel, the fossil fuel infrastructure. So if that was taken, to answer your question, if that was made obsolete.
Sure, I get that. But what I'm saying is why can't they take control of the new technology just as easily?
Well, water is the fuel, partly heavy water, but water is the primary fuel for fusion. So
they're taking control of the water.
I was going to say, is that why they're buying up water sources?
But it's easier to get a corner on the market for uranium or even for petroleum. But if you try to get a corner on the market for water, where water has to be wherever humans live.
But they're already doing it.
Well,
but there's a big pushback. I think they're trying, but people are not happy about that, and that's one thing where people still realize
it still happens.
It's essential to life.
It could trigger revolt. Their attempt to corner the market on water could trigger a revolt. So basically the turning point from the ascendant phase to the descendant phase of capitalism is the point where the circulating capital to fixed capital ratio, with the numerator being fixed capital, gets greater than 1. And so the exposure to techno depreciation is such that for core capital and the core capitalist ruling class, further growth of the productive forces is net unprofitable. When you net out the scrapping, the writing off, the charging off of capital equipment, technologically obsolete capital equipment, relative to the margin of extra profit you get from increased productivity, the net is negative. So it's unprofitable for the core capitalists to have further growth of the productive forces. That's the turning point.
Do you think that's part of the popularity of what they call the universal basic income these days? Even high up, congressional members, well, not that they're the highest, but I mean they're the representatives, spokespeople. I mean, there's a growing popularity.
Well, I think you can predict with something
people
like a law of
nature, Valley, and a lot of very wealthy.
You can predict as something like a law of nature that in the descendant phase of capitalism, after that turnover that we just discussed, that there'll be a faction that wants to kill off most of humanity in order to maintain control, and then there'll be a faction that wants to go with the rise of the global working class, the global middle class, and to use their greater education and traditions and schooling and so on to lead it. So there's what I call the Rockefeller faction, which is the humanicidal faction, and there's the Roosevelt faction, and the Kennedys were part of the Roosevelt faction. I think Trump is a sort of distorted reassertion of he's not a typical Republican, he's a reassertion of
He used to be a Democrat.
Of the Roosevelt faction. And the Roosevelt faction and the Rockefeller faction are in deadly war. I mean, I believe, my hypothesis is that the killing off of John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King was part of a planned coup against the post-war remnant of the Roosevelt faction. And that since that happened, the working class has been under stealth attack continually in this country, through deindustrialization, through export of jobs, through the whole trend of legislation.
Pretty overt, but
not very stealthy.
Also, I don't understand why the humanicidal faction has to be limited to Rockefeller.
Well, they seem to be the dominant. They seem to be dominant.
So that reminds me.
And of course, they'll kill off other people who rival them. So
there's probably lots of factions, but there's agreements and mutual interests, and the Rockefellers are one of the names that we know of that
They
My
seem to be
understanding
dominant through the
that,
Trilateral Commission before, and through the New York Council on Foreign Relations, through the State Department, and through the Rockefeller Foundation, and so many other, the University of Chicago, the AMA, which was founded by the Rockefeller family, and so on.
my understanding that that faction, what you're calling the Rockefeller faction, sort of the handbook for their vision of the world is breaking world by all kinds of things.
I think there's a lot to be said for that, although
A very small population, highly controlled society.
Yeah, I don't think they just want to control the market on water so they want to put, I think everybody who's intelligent knows capitalism can't go, even with disaster capitalism, even with the continual creative destruction, it's inevitable that it's going to come to an end, and what's going to be the next step? I think that's what these factions are fighting over, and they want, I think it's going to be one form of socialism. This is actually another Zizek metaphor that I kind of like. He says that, it's socialism is our future, whether it's going to be a dystopian, version of socialism or utopian. It depends on how well we're organized, how conscious we are, how much of the commons we're able to kind of distribute more locally and not have it be centralized. And I think one of the reasons that I see your point that, even with all Trump's problems, it just does seem to be some of his policies at least could be seen to be furthering some kind of delay in this process that allows for more regional distribution of power.
and a rise in working class incomes and living standards again for a while.
But it's that. What is their ultimate plan? Just delaying and reindustrializing. Reindustrializing.
See, the trouble with the Trump.
Wait. How are any of his policies helping the working class?
Well, I mean, look at what's happening in this expansion, the longest expansion in U.S. history, the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years.
That's all bullshit. I mean, the expansion.
All of those numbers
the labor market being hot, so that wages are starting to rise, so that people can get jobs. I mean, and reindustrialization, creating tariff barriers that will allow industry to reform in the U.S. In so many ways, he's a friend of the working class, and it's the working class that got him, the more traditional working class that got him elected.
Well, that's true. I don't see him benefiting the working class, and I don't even see him cutting any
It
interest.
seems like most of his policies, giant tax cuts for
It's a marketing thing.
wealthy and
In a capitalist
most of the middle class people I know got hit really hard this tax season.
the upper layers.
And it was not a good one for me either.
Yeah,
But if
it was
very low.
If you
illusory.
lower corporate taxes in a capitalist, if you want to create employment in a capitalist system, and his horizon is within capitalism, if you want to do that, you need to raise the rate of profit to incentivize investment that will generate employment.
But all it's doing is buyback, stock buyback.
Well, there's a lot of that, buying back their own toilet paper. Yeah, there's that going on too. But there's also some new investment in industry, and there's new jobs being created, and that's why we have 3.7% unemployment.
But
That's why it's so low.
Figure.
Well, I believe it because I see trying to hire, and it's very hard to hire people right now without them being snatched away by another employer with a slightly higher wage. So I'm seeing it before my very eyes where I work. So
Where do you work?
we can talk about that
Okay.
offline.
And what kind of work I should?
Nonprofit.
Okay. Nonprofit. Interesting.
But I think, what you just said, I think, in a way, I think George Orwell was the continuator of Marx in his vision in 1984 of where capitalism is heading. And it may be called socialism, but I call it state capitalism. And there are various varieties of state capitalism. There's capitalist class dominated state capitalism like in fascism and even what we have now. There's pure state bureaucratic state capitalism like what we had in Stalinist Russia, and the Chinese mixture of private and state capitalism grew out of that pure state bureaucratic state capitalism. But what I'm looking for is an alternative to state capitalism, because I think state capitalism is the end state, death state of capitalism. It destroys human liberty, it destroys freedom, and I think it inevitably becomes humanicidal. Either through permanent warfare, as in Orwell's.
I think that they want to transition out of state capitalism.
Yeah.
I think that was Zizek's point, is a little further down the road, that through state capitalism, either through these humanicidal tactics, which to me seem rather extreme.
It might be neo-feudalism.
I like that.
Neo-feudalism's a good word.
I like that
Yeah.
distinction though, because a lot of people have this misconception that that more well, the common misconception and the sort of like dragging through the mud of the word socialism, that more government is equals socialism.
I want
Socialism
a
is where
socialism
the
with no
workers
government.
control the means of production, right? That is like kind of the definition of socialism.
I
Real
would say
socialism.
that,
Real.
it strikes me that capitalism is already dead and gone, and we're already in some other state. I just want to throw that as my sort of radical,
Well, yeah,
contrary.
these terms are
Yeah, they are.
But
slippery, very deep.
I mean, when I was talking, I said late capitalism. I just meant the very late stages where we're at now with, post-Fordian informational capitalism. And in that sense, we are, as I was saying, becoming more and more the creators of the protocols of our control. And so,
Isn't
socialism, yeah, exactly. So socialism could be seen to be, okay, now in this post-capitalist world, the elites have disappeared, we don't have to work.
Orwell showed that ideological ploy or gambit.
But we're enslaved in ways that we don't even know.
Exactly.
There was a
Big
hierarchy, the Big Brother,
A cult of personality.
Yeah, and
Even if there was no such person.
and a police state apparatus to
Oh, yes.
That's how control becomes effective, is that it becomes completely internalized,
Yeah.
which is why eventually
the
the
ruling
conversation,
class
I think,
here-
does have to get
The
beyond
ruling
politics.
class here in Britain and elsewhere is investing a lot in means of surveillance. They don't quite have the cameras in our bedrooms yet, but Orwell
Oh, yes, they do.
But
Yes, they do.
Some people have, I noticed, put a piece of tape over their thing.
I do.
Yes, I do that, but, you know,
I'm like Zizek. I'm like, if they want to watch me undress, I don't care.
yeah.
Makes me feel less lonely.
Yeah,
They're like,
I have an eye.
Big Brother is
Hey,
caring
yeah.
about you. Big Brother is taking care of you.
So
He
what
loves you.
about like in China they've already largely implemented 5G and they have facial recognition
And
technology.
whammy, they call it.
all over the place, and they're tracking and I don't know
China may be our future if we don't
to what
get it
extent
right.
into like the nitty gritty details, but it seems like they are cataloging and keeping track of people in a very
That is a
methodical and
massively
controlled
massively vicious bureaucracy, and they will do anything to keep their power. They're paranoid about.
Are you speaking of America or China?
I'm speaking of China.
Same difference. I mean, but
Not
the-
entirely.
I think that the smart elites want to get beyond that, because that's still in the disciplinary mode, even though it's informational technology based. It's still
But the Chinese ruling class doesn't.
What?
The elites in Britain and the U.S. may want to get beyond that, but the Chinese bureaucrats
I think the
don't.
Chinese are learning their lesson too.
Really?
And this is
What are
definitely
the signs?
this whole conversation is very Zizekian, so sorry to keep bringing him up, but he has a great example here. So at one point, it's funny enough. It's not an explicit joke, but at one point when they were dealing with Tibet, they were making laws that they were the ones that had to be the decision makers on who the reincarnation of the lamas
yeah,
are.
the Dalai and the Pacha.
Right. But eventually, they realized, okay, like, we gotta be more hands off, like,
They're just
no one's going to
provoking-
respect it if it's the Chinese government.
They had
and
this
they're
strict
provoking enormous resentment
Yeah.
There was a leftover from the Cultural Revolution
And the
where they
guy
were
that-
trying to regulate and get rid of the mysticism and all that, but then eventually they learned, they were watching the West and learned, like, this isn't efficient, like,
Yes.
you know, we can, you know, control in more subtle ways, and so gradually I think they have shifted more and more towards, like, cultural state capitalism, their own Asian version, but in ways that, you know, realize that, yeah, people think that they're free and they get to decide the ways that...
In the 60s, he used to call this process co-optation. I don't know if you've heard that word, you probably have.
Yeah, it's very weird.
Well, I wonder if the Chinese government is having any like second thoughts about their policies after the Hong Kong.
Maybe that will drive them to see.
Yeah. They're a more conformist society too, and so it's easier to, like, you know, just tell people what to do and they'll do it if they want to do it. But, you know, if you really, as people become more westernized and educated, then you got to get them to want to self-censor, to want to regulate their own behavior, and so so Big Brother can disappear into the network. And
Orwell anticipated politically correct speech in his concept of newspeak. He saw that coming too.
I saw that Facebook is really interested in not just obviously what you write on there, but what you edit out. So if you start to write something and you change the wording,
Store that.
I forget what this was based on, but someone said that this was went into a special category of, like, oh, what are they?
Self-censorship observation.
So you have a notepad open on your desktop and you type your post into that, and then you copy and paste it to get around that.
Or just
Well,
don't
they-
do your editing before you.
Yeah.
The back door that is installed in every.
Usually my
computer
self-censoring is like, oh, I misspelled a word. That's why I'm backing up.
Yeah.
Me too.
Oh, I've deleted plenty of things I was about to post,
Oh, that's
and I said something innocuous. I'm sure that that has provoked somebody's interest, but well, it's interesting because I've been reading some interesting information about, like, the surveillance that's happening and the technology that's furthering it. And one of them is about this wide area something. I can't remember the rest, but in that they have now developed interesting cameras that can at the same time take in an entire city. There's surveillance above various aircraft, but satellite too. They can take in an entire city within the scope of the camera, and at the same time, in any view of the entirety of the city, they can also zoom in at any spot and bring up enough details such as facial recognition.
wide area motion imagery.
Thank you. Yeah. And BuzzFeed had a very interesting expose about, like, the FBI planes that they are flying in some U.S. cities, sometimes hundreds of flights for surveillance, and that, for instance, when that there was some incident in California, I'm trying to remember which one, but it was a Muslim shooter, so maybe it was that fairly recent one, and that before the news even was disseminated publicly over any media, they observed the FBI suddenly, all these flights flocking to this particular area, that they had literally hundreds of planes that headed in that direction to observe, to see what they could see, I guess. And so the conclusion seems to be that, well, I don't know, maybe we already know this conclusion. We're being surveilled in ways that technology is furthering at a pace that is almost, well, even unimaginable in terms of, like, this camera lens that can see a whole city in one view, and you can take that view, and while still keeping the whole zoom in on anybody, because they can recognize faces. And so I was reading this. It's a Wired magazine.
Orwell's prescience continues to impress me.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it is rather Orwellian.
Speaking earlier of rereading books, but maybe that's one we could all revisit.
Yeah.
I read that very early in
Yeah.
before high school, actually.
Yeah,
It really
I read it a
overwhelmed me.
couple of times, but not in many years. Yeah, I think I read that in high school as well.
I would even say
And A
that
Brave New World. I definitely went through a dystopian,
I did too, a whole phase of
Yeah.
reading. Yes, I did too.
which I'm still kind of fascinated by dystopian.
Well, it is the genre of our time, isn't it?
Yeah, everyone, so many people have told me, oh, you gotta watch Black Mirror, and they're resistant to it. There's something about it.
I think
pessimistic.
I haven't even heard
Maybe
of it.
that's it.
So there.
Maybe that's it. I love Philip K. Dick though, and
What's it
There's
called?
a difference between pessimism
Black
and
Mirror.
dystopian.
It's on Netflix. There's a much. Well, I haven't watched Black Mirror, but I think Electric Dreams, which is on Amazon, it's based on Philip K. Dick's short stories.
What is it?
It's called Electric Dreams.
And what is it?
Oh, it's a TV show on Amazon Prime
No.
streaming.
I don't have a TV. I never watched these things. I'm
And
completely culturally.
yeah, it's based on Philip K. Dick's short stories, but
That's what we ought to read.
updated. It's sometimes he would get the technology has advanced beyond what he could imagine. Although
That's who I'd like to read in this group.
I'm going through a Isaac Asimov book right now too.
Have you read the Foundation series?
I haven't read the whole series, but I've read the first like 1.5.
That was hugely influential for me because that dream I had, the psychohistorical equations were like
right.
a part of. Yeah, so
Okay.
it really grabbed me. Yeah, so I'm definitely into that part of that as well. I think that Marx said in the preface to the first German edition of Capitalism, he said, the goal of this work is to lay bare the economic law of motion of modern society. And I actually think that law should be called the Orwell-Marx law. And the law should be that capitalism evolves into humanicidal state capitalism. That is the law of motion of modern society.
You mean complete autophagy?
Self-eating? Well,
or do they say autophagy? I don't know.
I'm not sure how to pronounce it either. I haven't heard it pronounced by others enough.
Yes, me neither. I think I have heard autophagy, but
it should be a political.
Scientific terms are based on Latin, so no one knows how to pronounce them. It's just sound it out.
Yeah, we just take it.
It's a fad thing. A fashion leader has to come up with a pronunciation that then becomes authoritative.
I remember in an herb class I was in, we had a British herbalist guest lecturer, and he begins talking. I mean, he's been talking a while, but at one point he had this whole phrase, and I'm trying to remember all the things he stuck into it, and it was just like he had spoken in a complete foreign language. And he said something about the respiratory system, and that it sprung together with a whole a whole series of other words that it took me. I had to stop and go.
There's another one.
What?
There's a lot of those like medical terms that they pronounce differently in Canada and
I had a from somewhere in Asia. I had a TA in a math class who pronounced parentheses. So, I mean, that wasn't too hard to decipher, but it still shocked me at first.
I like it.
Should we wrap up? I think that was a pretty good discussion. I would like any final thoughts.
Yeah, let's hear.
I mean, I think we barely scratched the surface.
That's
so
what
we're
I
not sure,
thought.
but we can go forward with next time. maybe with her comment that I thought was very pregnant.
Oh, I want to hear what you have to say about this. I definitely can. Do we have a few moments?
We have a few minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to hear.
Oh, a few, I don't know.
Go for it.
We can always edit it out later.
Yeah.
That's a real incentive, isn't it?
Yeah, speaking of incentivizing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of things, number of directions I thought of going, with dystopian versus pessimism, because I think that with dystopian, I think I like Philip K. Dick, because I don't consider that pessimistic usually, because he's such a spiritual thinker, and when he's writing about a dystopian scenario, it's enlightening to me. And so the paper that I wrote recently, I go into detail with the show Man in the High Castle, and I talk about Black Mirror just briefly. I think like its characterization of people is just very pessimistic, and the characters aren't empathetic. Unlike
That's
I've noticed that with a lot of recent TV.
Yeah, I didn't know.
I don't watch a lot of TV, but the shows that I've caught recently, there's a lack of empathy and just very self-centeredness of the characters, and there's I guess I grew up watching mainly Star Trek, so
right,
which is like there's always this community, teamwork,
family.
But even with bad characters, so in Man in the High Castle, some of the main characters are Nazis. The premise in the show is that the Nazis actually won World War II, and so it's a multiverse alternative timeline show. But even the Nazis are sympathetic. You see the humanity, and so even when you're getting a dystopian scenario, you're getting some type of vision of why things are the way they are. To me, that's whether the character is evil or not, you're seeing why they are the way they are, and so they're not dehumanized.
Yeah.
And so to get back to what she was saying, which before about, if there are no problems, or like,
No, I didn't say that at all.
Well, you said the Eastern version. I wasn't going to.
No, I didn't say there were no problems. I said life isn't a problem. Life isn't a problem.
So what is the problem? If there is problems, but life isn't a problem.
Well, being alive isn't a problem.
So where do the problems come from?
Oh, I'm not saying that you don't see them or you don't experience them, but the issue is life isn't a problem. So that's a different perspective than...
I might say life isn't a problem that we want to solve, right? Because the solution isn't ideal, right?
I missed that. Should I say that again?
I would say life isn't a problem that we want to solve. I think life is a problem in a positive sense, because I use that word problem in a positive way.
Okay, how do you use it in a positive? What do you mean?
Because we spend our lives dealing with problems. That's the substance of life. Conflict is drama, right? So we watch shows even if they're dystopian, and we enjoy them because they make us think, we ponder what they mean, why problems are.
How boring would life be without problems?
But what I'm saying
stories.
is that we start to conceptualize our lives as problems. And what this perspective is saying is not that problems are not, that problem is a state of mind in a large way, in the sense that life itself is not a problem, but we see our lives as problems. That's my point, which is somewhat different than what you were saying.
Yeah, I think it is. And you mentioned it being an Eastern spiritual perspective, and I think that is a common, especially in the more ascetic.
The way I heard you explaining.
The antithesis of the Buddhist life is suffering.
Yeah, it is the
You
antithesis
take,
of that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
If you admit that suffering is the problem.
You say that life isn't a problem is the antithesis of life is suffering.
That's what it seems like.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I don't see. Yeah, I don't see it. I mean, I think there are a lot of in Eastern philosophy, there's a lot of dialectics that exaggerate the positions, but I tend to think that they're really all seeing in different ways. And so the Buddhists saying life is suffering, life's a problem, they're not saying so die. I mean, yeah, there are nihilistic versions of it.
No, because what the Buddha says is life is suffering, but then he goes on to say, suffering doesn't end.
Blow that candle out.
But the end isn't
Right.
death, it's enlightenment. And so there's obviously a conception within there that life, the noble truths that, life is suffering, there's a cause, there's a solution, and there's a path to that solution. So,
But who says death was the end?
I'm saying that if life was a problem, suffering,
You might think that death or suicide.
then the absence of life would be the solution, right?
That's
But obviously his point is,
No.
life is suffering, but there's obviously a life without suffering,
Right.
that's enlightenment, that's this ability to not.
Or maybe just simply being alive in a way that you don't see being alive as a problem.
And that's what I'm getting at, is that even though the Hindu tradition, which has a very deep fundamental sense, celebrates life as bliss.
Right.
And so on the
Ananda.
surface, it's like, those are completely opposite philosophies. But I think that they're just emphasizing,
What is completely opposite?
we're using this word life like it, and so that it's different. And what are opposites? Life is suffering, life is bliss.
Oh.
From bliss, all things come by bliss. They are sustained, and to bliss they return. Like it's all bliss, and the suffering aspect is an illusion in Hinduism. And Buddha is just actually emphasizing.
I think what the Buddha is saying is that it's an approach.
What's an approach?
Like
It's seeing it as a problem, would you say?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so he's taking a more pragmatic approach to Indian spirituality and philosophy. So I don't see them as opposed. Is my point. But what
I'm not either.
But what I'm getting at though is, I think that there's a better philosophical framework for this that gets at what they're trying to get at, but it avoids some of these problems that come about, especially when Eastern philosophy gets incorporated into modern and Western society, which is becoming, I think, the new kind of global cosmopolitan religion, New Age-ism, whatever you want to call it, a mixture of religion.
And especially when it gets incorporated into guru exploiter fraud ideologies.
And capitalism and all these things that, don't worry about it, don't think about it, life's not a problem, there are no problems, just chill out, relax, and have fun, and live your life.
I don't think that's the point.
It's not the point, and my point is that...
Okay.
Is that just, the language of
Often for guru profit.
So, in postmodernism, for instance, there's a long history of that whole discipline, that discourse, critiquing traditional metaphysics, because even if these things that they're talking about are eternally true in some mystical sense, the language, and maybe the language worked at a time period that it was created, especially in our time period, we need something more sophisticated that isn't this traditional metaphysics with essentialist ideas that life is this, life is that, because life, these words take on different meaning in different contexts.
Sure.
And so the context that I was trying to give was understanding problems as something productive and positive, and this is part of the whole postmodern tradition. Power is something productive, not something repressive. Even though it can be repressive, it's always productive of relations. And so getting back to this way of framing negation, instead of trying to get rid of the problem, get rid of the powers that are repressing us, it's always looking at the productive relation as a problem, but a problem not as something that has to be solved in a final way, but that has to be reworked and always recontextualized. And so the power has to be not eliminated or taken, but because we are the producers, we are the source of power, accepting that power and accepting that problem as something that we're experimenting with going forward, and embracing that experimentation of life. And to me, that you can even see that as a synthesis of these misinterpretations of Buddhism and Hinduism. Life is suffering or life is joy. Although life is a problem, life is suffering, but it's by learning to suffer well, and this is the core Buddhist concept, suffering well is how you gain enlightenment. Learning how to suffer with joy, suffering then becomes something else. It transforms into a blissful embracing of life as a creative problem that never really is solved ultimately, but it's always
there's something missing in that, I think, which is that I want to say that the very experience of suffering itself is a construct that you have a choice to change, and that it's not that there's not such a thing as, or there's, anyway, I'm sorry, we're going on, and maybe I'm going on.
Oh, you're fine.
But I feel like there's something that is being assumed about, as you said, a metaphysics of isness or essentialism, and I am disagreeing that this presentation of life is not a problem is not an essentialism. I think the statement is not an essentialism, at least as I heard you characterize it. Instead, what I think is that the statement, life is not a problem, is that it's really that life is simply not, in some sense I want to say it's uncharacterizable, but that if you say life is suffering, that is an approach, that is a construct. Just as to even say life is bliss on some level is a construct. Because for one thing, what does it mean we all immediately assign characteristics to bliss? We immediately assign characteristics to suffering, and I think that what, at least in my view, my construct of Buddhism is that these things maybe even partake in what you were talking about, the kind of productivity of life, and what you were talking about, the kind of, anytime you encapsulate something, you've lost something too, something escapes.
It's all constructs, right?
Yeah. But so what I'm saying is that life is suffering is a kind of proposition that isn't necessarily meant as like any kind of full truth, or even a truth that you progress logically through and thereby overcome.
Well, all these are, right? I mean, these are all different constructs with different meanings in different contexts. You can look at the native context, and you can look at how it shares today.
Sure, but okay. Let's see. Where was I going with this? That it's like you saying that there's a kind of logic that goes through the Four Noble Truths, and what I'm saying is that there's not that kind of progressive logic and dismantling that is happening through the statement of the Four Noble Truths, but it's something else. And I don't know if I could characterize that or even discuss it, but anyway, and maybe it's just my assumption too that I thought I understood where you were going with what you were saying about the statement and the paradox, or the kind of
all I'm saying is that everything's problematic, right? So even the construct of life is not a problem. Everything's not problematic. It's problematic. Even the statement that things are problematic is problematic, because in a way, maybe there's no problem at all. Maybe you can't. Maybe in some sense, hey, if I say, hey, let's just relax.
What's that
there's
other?
No problem. That is value.
What's that other thing? High and low depend upon each other, so that problem and not problem are two sides of the same.
Things can be useful in one
Anyway,
context and not in another. And so my point being, just not that phrase didn't have any value, or that I didn't feel it was the truth that you were saying, but just that in this context of our society and capitalism especially, it's this option of, oh, there's all these fucking problems, what do I do? Buddhism comes along. No problem. Oh, thank God. Somebody just...
It's definitely a problem that you dropped an F-bomb on the podcast.
I'm just kidding. Bruce, do you have any final thoughts before we close?
This has been coming up repeatedly in our discussions, this concept of negation. And I wanted to summarize my view of tonight's topic through commenting on that in the propositional logic tradition, negation is pretty much abstract negation. When something is the negation of something that's true, a proposition that's true, it's kind of a nothingness. And Hegel criticized abstract negation, the idea that when you negate something, you leave nothingness in its place. He had the idea of determinate negation, where the negation maybe of a green apple is a red apple, where the determination of color and redness changes, but the apple's still there. And he had this idea of Aufheben. And if you look at the German word Aufheben, as I've come to learn about it, it means simultaneously to elevate something, to negate its former position and move it to a higher position, and to conserve it through that whole process. So when I'm looking for number two here, I'm looking for how can we perform an Aufheben negation of capitalism.
Number two.
What can be done?
What I think can be done is that we have the potential to perform on ourselves as capitalism an Aufheben negation of capitalism, which will conserve capitalism, but in a constrained and contained form that contains its detriments, and also elevates it to a higher level, and also changes it, transforms it determinately from what it is now. So what I'm looking for in the elements of that determinant and Aufheben negation of capitalism is a path to it that avoids violence, because I think violence leads back to state capitalism, that avoids violent revolution, that avoids illegal revolution, but that uses, and Marx talked about this at the Congress in The Hague of the International Working Men's Association, that where there's suffrage, especially for workers, but now for women as well for some time, where there's suffrage, there does not need to be violent revolution in order to make the transition beyond capitalism. And so I'm looking for an electoral, legal, constitutional amendment path to the successor system. I'm looking toward a dialectical synthesis of reform and revolution that accomplishes that. And I'm looking for a grassroots, a deeper kind of grassroots democracy to solve the problems of capitalist representative democracy and of the prostitution of the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary by the concentrated capital money ownership of the capitalist ruling class, a way to add economic checks and balances that will add their own value to containing capitalism detriments, as well as simultaneously revivify the political checks and balances that are already in the U.S. Constitution.
So what do you think of the postmodernist sort of deconstruction of capitalism?
Well, I think they're just a bunch of baloney as far as I've seen so far.
You're opening up a can of worms.
Yeah, I don't want to go off on the digression.
For next time. For next time.
And I've been looking for this for years, these criteria I just named out. And I think I've found a good first approximation to that, which I call equitism, because it's about social equity and it's about generalized equity. It's about not private, exclusive capital equity and the shareholder democracy that leads to, but it's about three new universal forms of citizen property that create a new social relation of production of generalized equity, where it's an inclusive equity primarily that's shared by all citizens, and through different forms of that equity, and that's why I call it equitism. That these are all universal equities, not exclusive to capital equities, but they learn something, they outhaven something in shareholder democracy that emerged with capitalism into a more universal form of stakeholder democracy. But it's very grassroots based.
I would love to hear more about that, and maybe we can
Start
go into
there.
that on the next episode.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, so kind of my takeaway from this is that, like, the main action that we need to do as citizens of America, planet Earth, wherever, whatever, is slow down and think. Maybe do some meditation.
Maybe do some immanent critique.
Maybe do some imminent critique. Read some dystopian novels. I think
Learn
these
from them.
These are all lessons.
Learn how to avoid
from
them.
today's discussion. All right. Well, thanks for watching, and yeah, that was.
Next time.
I hope that recorded.